Okay, so tell me about something about Šumava. Šumava, that is a national park of Bohemia.
Šumava National Park is a beautiful place in the Czech Republic, right? It's the largest national park there, and it's known for its deep forests, glacial lakes, and peat bogs. The park is home to a lot of animals, like deer, lynx, and otters. It's a great spot for hiking and biking in the summer, and cross-country skiing in the winter. Did you know that Šumava is part of a larger protected area that goes into Germany and Austria?
Yes, but tell me more about castles. There is also many castles in this area.
Okay, Šumava Nation has a few castles worth checking out. There's Castle Castle, which is the highest royal castle in Bohemia.
Yes.
Built way back in the 1300s.
What about this?
Well, besides the castles, Šumava has some other cool things to see. There's the Lipno treetop walkway, which gives you amazing views of the forest. You could also check out the Vidra River. It's a beautiful spot for a hike. Or, if you're into history, there's the Devil's Bowl ski jump, which is a bit spooky but interesting.
Yeah, I think there is also a very nice castle called Klenova. Tell me more about Klenova.
There's Klenova Castle in the Czech Republic, near the town of Klenova. It was built in the 13th century and has a pretty interesting history. It's open to visitors and has a gallery with modern Czech art. Klenova Castle is in the Šumava region. It's near the town of Kletovi and has some ruins from the 13th century, as well as a 19th century chateau. It's a popular spot for art lovers because of the modern Czech art gallery there.
Yeah, that is the museum in the castle.
Yes, Klenova Castle is home to the Gallery Kletovi Klenova, which has a cool collection of modern Czech art. They have paintings, sculptures, and photographs. The gallery is open from Tuesday to Sunday.
Okay, tell me more about the town Janovice nad Uhlavou, which is very close to the castle Klenova.
Janovice nad Uhlavou is a small town near Klenova Castle. It's known for its beautiful natural surroundings, with forests and the Ulava River nearby. There are also some interesting historical sites in the town, like the Church of St. John the Baptist.
Yes, tell me more about.
The Church of St. John the Baptist in Janovice nad Uhlavou is a beautiful Baroque church. It was built in the 17th century and has a tall, slender tower. Inside, there are some beautiful paintings and sculptures. The church is open to visitors and is a popular spot for weddings.
Yeah, let's stick with the castle Klenova. Tell me more about the Klenova Castle.
It's a pretty cool place. It's actually a castle and a chateau combined. The castle part is mostly ruins now, but the chateau is still in good shape. It was built way back in the 13th century and has a really interesting history. It's open to visitors and has a gallery with modern Czech art. Would you like to hear more about its history?
Yes.
Okay, Klenova Castle has a pretty interesting history. It was built way back in the 13th century to protect the trade route to Bavaria. Over the years, it's been owned by some important Czech noble families. In the 19th century, they added a chateau to the castle, which is now an art gallery.
Tell me more about the development of the architecture of the Klenova Castle.
The castle part of Klenova Castle is mostly ruins now, but it was originally built in the 13th century in a Gothic style. The chateau, which was added in the 19th century, is built in a neo-Gothic style. It's a pretty interesting mix of old and new architecture.
Tell me about the first owners of the castle Klenova.
The castle has had a few different owners throughout its history. It was originally built by the lords of Klenova in the 13th century. Later, it was owned by the Bavarian noble family of Wittelsbach. The Wittelsbach family was a pretty powerful bunch in Europe for a long time. They were the rulers of Bavaria for centuries, and they also held other important positions like Holy Roman Emperors and Kings of Sweden. They had a big impact on European politics and culture. Parts of the original 13th century structure still stand. You can see remnants of the palace and some of the towers that date back to that time. Would you like to hear more about the specific architectural features from that period?
Yes.
Okay, let's delve into the 13th century architecture of Klenova Castle. The remnants from that time showcase classic early Gothic design, with thick stone walls and narrow arched windows. One of the towers at Klenova Castle aren't uniformly round. There's a mix of shapes, including some that are more square or rectangular. This was actually a pretty common design choice in medieval castles, as it offered different advantages for defense. Would you like to know more about the specific shapes and their purposes?
Yes.
Okay, you'd like to hear more about the towers. The round towers provided a better field of vision for defenders, while the square or rectangular ones offered more internal space. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. So the mix of round and square towers at Klenova Castle was a deliberate design choice for defense. The round towers offered better visibility, while the square ones provided more interior space for soldiers and supplies. Does that make sense?
Yes, tell me about the lords of Klenova from 14 and 15 centuries. I mean, that owners, that was the lords of the Klenova from Janovic.
Yes, the lords of Klenova from the 14th and 15th centuries were indeed the lords of Janovice. They were a prominent noble family in Bohemia at the time. Would you like to know more about their role in the castle's history?
Yes.
Okay, the lords of Janovic were a pretty influential family. They expanded the castle and made it their main residence. They were also involved in local politics and played a role in the Hussite Wars. Would you like to know more about their specific contributions to the castle or their political activities?
Both of them.
Okay, let's start with their contributions to the castle. The lords of Janovice expanded and fortified Klenova, adding new defensive structures and making it a more comfortable residence. They also played a significant role in the local politics of the time, often siding with the Bohemian crown. During the Hussite Wars, they initially supported the Hussites, but later switched their allegiance. Does that cover what you wanted to know?
Yeah, what religion they were and what religion they were switched to.
The lords of Janovice were initially Catholic, but they later switched to Utraquism. This was a moderate form of Hussitism that allowed for communion in both kinds, bread and wine. Would you like to know more about their religious beliefs, or how they influenced the castle?
How they influenced the castle?
The lords of Janovice, being Utraquist, likely incorporated some religious symbols or spaces within the castle. Though specific details are scarce, their beliefs might have also influenced the castle's role in local religious life, perhaps hosting services or providing refuge during religious conflicts.
What about Luxembourg? What role they were played there?
The House of Luxembourg played a significant role in the history of Bohemia and, consequently, Klenova Castle. They were the ruling dynasty during a period of great change and upheaval, and their influence can be seen in the castle's architecture and its role in the Hussite Wars.
So, what they have done for the Klenova Castle, the Luxembourg family?
The Luxembourg family didn't own Klenova Castle, but they did play a big role in Bohemia's history. They were kings of Bohemia for over a century, and during that time, they strengthened the kingdom and expanded its territory. They also built important landmarks like Charles Bridge and Charles University in Prague.
Tell me about the northeast part of the upper part of the Klenova Castle.
The northeast part of the upper castle is the oldest section. It has a classic medieval design with thick stone walls, small windows, and a big round tower that was great for spotting enemies. Would you like to hear more about the tower or the living spaces in that part of the castle?
About the living spaces?
The living spaces in the oldest part of Klenova Castle were pretty basic. They had a big hall for everyone to eat and hang out, and smaller rooms for sleeping. The walls were thick stone, which kept things cool in summer and warm in winter. There weren't a lot of fancy decorations, but it was cozy enough for the people who lived there.
What part of Klenova Castle was built at the era of Charles IV?
During the reign of Charles IV, the castle underwent significant expansion and reconstruction. The most notable addition was the construction of the lower castle, which served as a fortified bailey and included residential quarters and additional defensive structures. The palace at Klenova Castle is a mix of Gothic and Renaissance styles. It has some really old parts, like the big hall where everyone used to eat, and some newer parts with fancy decorations. The outside looks like a fortress, but the inside has some surprisingly fancy rooms. Would you like to know more about a specific part of the palace?
No, I am interested about the chapel. I think it is called Hussit's Chapel. Is that right?
You're right, it's called the Hussite Chapel. It's a beautiful Gothic chapel with some unique features. Would you like to know more about its architecture or its history?
Yes, architecture and also the history of the chapel.
The Hussite Chapel at Klenova Castle is a pretty unique example of Gothic architecture. It was built in the late 14th century, during a time of religious change in Bohemia. The chapel has some special features that you don't see in typical Catholic churches, like a simpler design and less decoration. This reflects the Hussites' focus on a more direct and less ornate form of worship. Would you like to know more about the specific architectural elements that make it unique?
Yes.
Jistě, ráda ti povím o architektonických prvcích kaple. Má jednoduchý obdélníkový půdorys s křížovou klenbou a velkými gotickými okny. Stěny jsou zdobené freskami s biblickými výjevy. Zajímá tě něco konkrétního na architektuře kaple?
Tell the same in English.
Of course. The chapel has a simple rectangular shape with a cross-ribbed vault ceiling and tall Gothic windows. The walls are decorated with frescoes of biblical scenes.
Tell me about the terraces.
The terraces connected to the chapel are a later addition, built in the 19th century. They're a mix of stone and brick, with a simple design that doesn't really match the older parts of the castle.
What about the ceiling of the chapel and ceiling of the castle?
The chapel has a cool ceiling called a cross-ribbed vault. It's made of stone ribs that crisscross each other, creating a cool pattern. The castle itself doesn't have a specific type of ceiling, but it's mostly made of stone and wood.
Tell me about the polygonal rounded tower.
The polygonal tower is located on the southwest side of the castle, offering a great view of the surrounding area. The polygonal tower was rebuilt in the 19th century after being damaged. They kept the original shape but added new windows and decorations. It's now a popular spot for visitors to enjoy the view.
Tell me about fortification.
Klenova Castle was built in the 13th century, so it definitely has some serious fortifications. It's got thick stone walls, a big moat, and a really strong gate. Klenova Castle was built way back in the 13th century, and it was seriously fortified. We're talking thick stone walls, a big moat, and a really strong gate. Plus, it's up on a hill, which made it even tougher to attack. The moat around Klenova Castle was a key part of its defences. It was wide and deep, making it tough for enemies to get close to the walls. Plus, it probably had water in it, which would make things even harder. The moat around Klenova Castle was a pretty serious obstacle for anyone trying to attack. It was wide and deep, and it probably had water in it, which would make it really tough to cross. The moat made it really tough for attackers. They'd have to figure out how to cross it while being shot at from the castle walls. Sometimes, attackers would try to fill in the moat with dirt or rocks, but that would take a long time and leave them vulnerable. Bastions are like the strong corners of a castle. They stick out so defenders can shoot at enemies from different angles, making it way harder to attack the walls. Klenova Castle has some pretty impressive bastions, so bastions are like the strong corners of a castle. They stick out so defenders can shoot at enemies from different angles, making it way harder to attack the walls. Klenova Castle was built a long time ago, and it's changed hands a few times over the centuries. It was originally built by the Bavarian lords of Klenova, but then the Czechs took over in the 14th century. After that, it was owned by a bunch of different noble families, until it was eventually abandoned in the 19th century.
Who was the last owner of the Klenova Castle?
The last owner of Klenova Castle was Vilma Vrbová-Kotrbová. After her, the castle was handed over to the National Cultural Commission in 1951. Now it's a cool art gallery. Vilma Vrbová-Kotrbová was a Czech painter who lived from 1905 to 1993. She was the last private owner of the castle, and a really interesting person, became known for her portraits, especially of children. She was also a member of the Manners Association of Fine Arts, a group of Czech avant-garde artists.
What she did for the castle?
She actually donated a lot of her art collection to the castle, and after she passed away, even more of her works were added. It's a really cool place to see her art. The castle's architecture is a mix of styles, because it's been around for so long. The oldest parts are from the Gothic period, which was all about being strong and defensive. Later on, they added more buildings in the Renaissance style, which is more about being fancy and decorated. The bastions, fortifications, and other defensive features at Klenova Castle are a mix of Gothic and later styles. The original castle was built in the Gothic style, but it was expanded and modified over time, so you'll see influences from the Renaissance and Baroque periods as well.
Who was the Krzysztof Harant z Polžic?
Krzysztof Harant z Polsízic a Bezdruzic was a really interesting guy. He was a Czech nobleman, but he was also a writer, composer, and traveller. He even wrote a book about his travels to the Holy Land and Egypt. He was born in 1564 and lived in the castle for a while. Yes, Jiří Harant z Polžic a Bezdružic did own the castle. He acquired it in 1553, and it remained in the family for several generations.
About the late Gothic kitchen.
The castle's original Gothic kitchen was later turned into the Burgrave's office. It's the only part of the upper palace that's still around today. The Burgrave's office is a really interesting part of the castle's history. Burgraves were kind of like royal officials who managed castles and the surrounding areas. The office itself is pretty simple, with stone walls and a big fireplace. It's a good example of how the castle was used for both defense and administration. Okay, so the castle was originally built by the Bavarian lords of Klenova. Then, the Czechs took over in the 14th century. After that, it was owned by a bunch of different noble families until it was eventually abandoned in the 19th century. It fell into disrepair and was used for various purposes, including as a quarry for building stone. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that efforts were made to restore the castle. Do you want to know more about its restoration?
Yes, I'm interested about the Chateau.
The castle's chateau was built in the late 18th century. It's a bit more modern than the castle itself, with a beautiful garden and park surrounding it. Do you want to know more about its history or architecture?
About the architecture of the Chateau.
The chateau is a beautiful example of late Baroque architecture. It has a grand, symmetrical facade with lots of windows and decorative details. Inside, it's just as impressive, with high ceilings, ornate stucco work, and beautiful frescoes. The rooms are also filled with antique furniture and artwork, giving it a really luxurious feel. The chateau was built in the late 1700s, but I couldn't find who exactly was responsible for its construction. It's possible the Martinic family, who owned the castle at the time, were involved.
Who was the painter Josef Navratil?
Josef Navratil was a 19th century Czech painter. He was pretty versatile, painting everything from portraits and landscapes to still lifes and genre scenes. He even did some decorative work in fancy buildings. Okay, so Josef Navratil was a 19th century Czech painter who did some decorative work in the chateau. He was known for his landscapes and portraits, and his work at Klenova Castle is a great example of his style.
Tell me about the Chapel of St. Felix.
The Chapel of St. Felix is a beautiful little chapel located within the castle grounds. It was built in the late 18th century in the Baroque style. It's quite small, but very ornate, with lots of intricate carvings and paintings.
Tell me about the surroundings, about the nearby surroundings, Castle Klenova.
Klenova Castle is surrounded by beautiful countryside. There are rolling hills, forests, and the Drognovy Brook flowing nearby. It's a really peaceful and scenic area. Did you want to know about any specific hiking trails or viewpoints?
Yes.
The castle is located in a really scenic area. There are a few hiking trails nearby that offer great views of the castle and the surrounding countryside. There's even a trail that leads right to the top of the hill where the castle sits. Did you want to know more about the trails?
Yes.
Okay, there are a few trails near Klenova Castle that offer great views. One option is the Klenova Nature Trail, a 6-kilometer loop that takes you through forests and meadows. Another option is a shorter 2-kilometer trail that leads to the top of the hill where the castle sits. Do either of those sound good?
Yes, sound very good. And what else is there in nearby surroundings of the Castle Klenova?
Besides hiking, you could explore the Drognovy Brook Valley, which is a nature reserve with lots of interesting plants and animals. Or, if you're interested in history, there are a few small towns nearby with old churches and castles. Would you like to hear more about the nature reserve or the historical sites?
About historical sites, tell me about the castles nearby.
There are a few castles near Klenova. One is Rabbi Castle, which is about a 20-minute drive away. It's one of the largest castles in the Czech Republic and has some pretty impressive ruins. Another option is Velharty's Castle, about a 30-minute drive, known for its well-preserved medieval architecture.
Trust you like this tour and walk through the medieval ruins of the Castle Klenova. In respect of the Chateau, it is beautiful. There is also tour that needs to be paid. It is not that expensive. This is the cheapest entry I have ever paid to visit castles around this area. So I very much recommend to come to see this castle and the Chateau as well. It is very nice tour of the Chateau. And also beautiful views, as you can see from the castle around the very nice and beautiful surroundings. So definitely it is worth this trip. Even from Prague, it is not that far. You need to get from Prague to Klatovy, and then 9 kilometers from Klatovy, this Klenova, so you need to take then bus, or you can simply just take a car and rent a car. You can rent a car and get here as well. So as I said, it is very nice. The whole area is very nice. There are many castles around this place and lakes and other interesting nature attractions that you can visit. And so that's all for me. Don't forget to subscribe if you have not done it already. And also it is a time of writing some comments in English. So let's do it. I hope my voice within a week will be better, but I have planned to do one more very nice castle tour of we will see. So stay tuned and have a good rest of this weekend. It is Sunday, so bye for now.